Hey everyone, Rush here. In this video, I'm going to go ahead and break down a +8 Motherlode that I did in week 1 of the War Within. This was a dungeon that we two-chested, so definitely managed it pretty well. I do think Motherlode is one of the easier dungeons this season, so if you get a chance to do it, I would definitely recommend it. Um, I know a lot of content creators on this first poll recommend skipping this assassin pack in the middle. However, my experience has been that one, you can't really skip by hugging the left without some sort of way to get past the pack, either like Mind Soothe from priests or like Shroud from rogues. So, because that's the case, I have just kind of been pulling that assassin pack, and honestly, I think it's fine to do. The big thing you have to keep in mind is that when the assassin starts channeling Fan of Knives, you need to make sure you interrupt it with a crowd control ability, so either Shockwave or Stormbolt. Then after you do that pack, you're going to come up to this next pack, and I do like to pull this Peacekeeper in this pack. A lot of guys are also recommending skipping Peacekeepers. Again, I think for pug purposes, I think you just want to pull this and just kind of do this group here. There are a couple mobs you have to worry about, namely the refreshment vendors that do Ice Spritzer. That's a channeled stun on a random player, so you need to make sure somebody interrupts that. And then there also will be an assassin in this pack, so make sure you crowd control them. Try not to pull this extra pack. I unfortunately kind of positioned poorly here around the tear gas and end up backing up into that pack when I should have just backed up down the ramp behind us. We managed to get through it, but we do end up with like one death. But it was kind of my mistake with how I positioned myself. And then we do get this other mech jockey pack. Honestly, the mech jockey packs I think are totally fine. The mech jockeys don't have that much health, so you can just focus them down. And then if they do start walking over to a mech to try and turn it into a peacekeeper, you can do a lot of things like slow them, you can CC them, you can knock them back. There's a lot of things you can do to keep them, prevent them from, creating a new peacekeeper. So just, it's not a big deal. I think the mech jockey packs are actually totally fine to do in this dungeon. This is going to be the second peacekeeper in this dungeon. There's going to be 3 total that you're going to end up pulling here. So this is another mech jockey pack. So you kind of still want to focus the mech jockey down so you don't have to worry about it, because it will run off to the left from where I'm currently facing to try to turn a peacekeeper on. So just focus it down and then kill the peacekeeper. One other thing, I didn't really do it in this dungeon, but you can spell reflect the charged shield from the peacekeeper as a warrior. So when it's doing that charged shield, that cast, just press spell reflect before it goes off, and you'll spell reflect it and prevent a lot of damage to yourself. It's definitely a nice little trick, because there's not a ton of things you can spell reflect in this season compared to season 1. So as you can see there, I just kind of went around to the right. You could pull that mech jockey group on the left if you want to pull more groups in this area. Honestly, I remember in Battle for Azeroth, you kind of did do a lot of the trash in this area, and then you would death skip after the 3rd boss up to the 4th boss. But death skipping isn't quite as viable with the Challenger's Peril when that comes online. Although at this key level, you don't have Challenger's Peril, so it's definitely nowhere near as punishing to do like a death skip if you want to. In fact, I think we did it for when we did a +10 for our weekly vault. We did do a death skip up to the 4th boss. We definitely didn't time that 10 though, but honestly the bosses were surprisingly really easy, even on a 10. I think we only wiped twice on between all 4 bosses. The thing that was giving us the most trouble was trash. Also, people being unfamiliar with the dungeon ended up pulling extra trash by walking into it. So that's one thing. Basically, everyone in the group kind of just needs to be aware of where trash is. So we're going on to the first boss here. This boss is pretty easy as a tank. The big thing is, basically you just need to scoot him away from these coins after he's done, spawning them on the ground there. I think in this dungeon I probably pull him a little bit too far from the coins, but you've got plenty of space to work with. The coin magnet ability that he does here, as you can see, it's got a pretty small radius, so you don't need to move him too far from the coins. But as long as he's out, that's kind of your big job as the tank, to make sure that he's not next to the coins. Otherwise, he'll get a damage buff, and then like those static pulses can wipe your group. So definitely that's your biggest priority as a tank, to make sure he's not next to the coins. You can also help out with these bombs. that get dropped on the ground. Basically, my rule is if there's a bomb nearby that it's not too difficult for me to grab, I will grab it. But don't go out of your way to grab that. That responsibility should be up to your DPS and healer to do it. And as you can see, this group does a pretty good job at making sure they get all the bombs that are out and around. And then that just lets me kind of focus on positioning the boss and not having to like move him around too much, because that's one other thing you want to keep in mind. You don't want to move him too much even when you're scooting him away from the coins, because your other the other members in your party are going to be trying to kick bombs into the boss, so they don't want to miss him. So if you're doing a lot of movement, then that can definitely happen. So but overall, this is a pretty easy boss. And then when we come up here, we're going to go ahead and just pull this left group. The really key mob in this group is the Azurite Extractor. And the reason is because when they do this extraction ability, they put a ton of these circles on the ground wherever party members are standing. I actually end up just committing to standing in one so I don't pull anything extra, and I just use a shield wall for it. Generally, though, you want to make sure you avoid it. You could also pull that group back into the first boss area and use that area to kite around. But you should have enough space to be able to move around without pulling the extra pack, but you may encounter some DPS or healers pulling extra packs by mistake. So, and then when we come up here, there is a patrol along with a stationary pack. This pack's pretty easy. It's basically just full of sappers and I think the miners or whatever. So that pack's pretty easy to do. Try to kick Rock Lance whenever you can. It does do a decent amount of damage to like a random party member, so it's definitely good to kick. Then you come up to this group here. It's actually not a bad idea, I think, to pull the group down below, the one you can see behind. I did skip it, but I think it's totally fine to pull that group, mostly because that group doesn't have an extractor in it, so it does make it a little bit easier. Here I kind of scuffed this pull because my healer was like, hey, there's the driver that like popped out of the extractor, and I forgot that they did that. So I was going up to pull these these shale mobs, and he was like, hey, there's a driver back here, and it kind of scuffed this pull a little bit, but ends up not being a big deal. The key kick in this group, though, is the Furious Quake. The Tectonic Barrier, honestly, it seems like they nerfed it quite a bit compared to Battle for Azeroth. I remember Tectonic Barrier adding a really big shield to those mobs, but now it seems like it doesn't really add that much. So I think the key cast to watch out for is just Furious Quake. If a barrier goes off, I don't think it's a big deal. And then when you come up to this mini boss, this Taskmaster, the key thing to remember with this guy is he does put a stacking bleed on you as a tank. It's a short duration on the bleed, so you can do things like when he charges away from you to another party member, it's pretty easy to have the bleed drop because of its short duration. You can also do things just like leap away, walk away for a couple seconds and let it fall off. If you're a dwarf, this is a great mini boss to save your dwarf ratio for. I actually used it on an extractor bleed earlier, which was a mistake. So if you're a dwarf, just save it for that mini boss. And then we're coming up to the second boss here. This boss is pretty easy. Honestly, the only thing you have to know is just when he turns one of these ads blue, just kill the blue ad. Ignore the second ad. Whoever's fixated just has to kite it. It is annoying for that person, but that's just the way the fight is. But yeah, basically you just ignore that second ad and just let that person kite it. And then essentially every time he summons the replacement ad, he will immediately empower the highest health ad after that. Usually it's the one he spawned, so just make sure you're ready with like a taunt and like a high threat ability. And then as a warrior with short offensive cooldowns, it's really good just to save your offensive cooldowns for every ad. It really helps with killing it as quickly as you can. And then for the Resonant Quakes, just walk out of it. And then I just scoot the boss kind of in like a little circle around his starting area. You can reposition him a little bit more. You do have some space to play with that, but just trying to be a little bit kind of min-maxy with my space management on this fight. So, and essentially that's the entire fight. It's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. The most important thing is just make sure you kill the enraged ad as quickly as you can. So it's good to save offensive cooldowns for when those come up, so that way you can just burst it down and just make the fight a bit easier. And then, so we'll pretty much be finishing off the second boss here. And then after this second boss is dead, we'll be taking a minecart down. Now, I just kind of went with a route in this next area that I remember from doing BFA doing this dungeon in BFA, which basically is if you go like if you do like a hard left. I kind of remember doing that, but I don't know if this is necessarily a great route you want to do, especially during fortified weeks or in higher keys, because of I think it is I can't remember what the name of the mob is. It's the masterminds that do Mind Lash. So the Mind Lash will fixate like a channel onto a random member in your party that isn't you, and it can't be interrupted because these mobs can't be crowd controlled. So it is a pretty decent amount of damage on like your random party members. So it may be that you don't want to do that left pull. I just remember doing this in BFA. That's kind of just what I went with. The other kind of thing that I like about doing this in smaller groups is it's relatively difficult for people to pull extra mobs by going this route, by doing like this hard left. We do end up pulling like this mastermind pat here if people had been positioned slightly closer, slightly away from it. But if you do get it, just pick it up and just kill it. But there may be other routes that are better where you could skip the masterminds. The only thing I worry about doing those routes is that you might have to thread the needle a little bit more between packs, and you may end up pulling like a bunch of extra trash that you ultimately don't need, in the long run. So, and then here we're just kind of doing this pack again. I think you could pull this pack pretty easily up into the 4-pack before the third boss that we're going to be coming up to, because there's not a mastermind in that group. There's just like, some of the smaller mobs like the alchemists and things that can be interrupted and crowd controlled. So I think you can kind of stack it with this group. I don't think that's really dangerous, but I kind of just do like a, single pull on each of these groups. This was like one of the first 8s I did this week, so I was just kind of playing it, trying to play it relatively safe whenever I could. And we were doing really good on time, so at this point I'm not even worried necessarily about pushing hard for time. I'm just more worried about us wiping, and I just want to make sure we don't wipe to anything. And the easiest way that can happen is if you do kind of a bunch of big pulls or whatever. So for this boss, for Rixie, I kind of end up messing this pull up. For some reason, I don't know why I was thinking this, but I was like, I need to like pull her back to the edge. That's not the way you want to position this boss. The way you want to do it is, as a warrior, just charge in, fight her in the middle, and then when you see the lines coming, so you can tell where she's splitting the room up, then you can adjust and go to the side of the room that you need to, in order for you to stand and fight her while your DPS is getting propellant blast on them. One other thing with Rixie, she hits tanks. She at least hits warriors really hard. I don't know about other tanks, but she hits warriors really, really, really hard. Even at the start of the pull, she does a ton of damage. So I have actually been pressing both Shield Wall and Spell Reflect right before I pull the boss, just to have a ton of damage mitigation up, because when I was pulling her without any defensive cooldowns, she was trucking my health really hard, and it was like a little bit scary. So I would recommend just pulling this boss with a defensive cooldown. You could Avatar too, if you have the talent that gives you shield wall when you press Avatar. That's what I'm currently running, so you could Avatar as well for the defensive. But basically just make sure you have some sort of defensive. That's my recommendation when you pull this boss. Otherwise you're going to be getting trucked really hard. You might stress your healer out, and so, but you can even just see there, she just does a ton of damage to tanks. So, and then after this boss, we're coming up to the last area. Now, if you are going to be doing this kind of area, I think, unless you are really confident with it, I think you are going to have to end up killing 4 war machines. So you obviously want to kill this first war machine as you're coming up to this like little gauntlet area. And then you just pull those 2 ordnance specialists in with the war machine. But you want to avoid doubling up war machines if you do end up pulling extra here. We do end up going a little bit over count because of the war machines we end up pulling. I'm kind of actually waffling here because I'm like, I'm not sure if I can make it past these war machines. I think I could have, but it's a little bit risky, and we just kind of made a call. We were like, all right, let's just pull this war machine, let's just kill it, to make the path clear. But I think it is possible to skip those patrolling war machines in this middle area of the gauntlet, even without like an invis or a shroud or anything like that. I think these mobs see invis though, I believe, but I'm not 100% sure. So we're going to be pulling this Ordnance Specialist, and then the reason I'm kind of slow playing this last pair of War Machines is because I want to kind of just clear the mines out first, because I don't want people to be like stressing about the mine. But the Evoker in our group ends up kind of scooting a little bit too close to the War Machine, so it does get pulled. So this pull's a little bit messy, I think, with all the mines and everything, but fortunately the mines are far enough away that we can kind of just back off and let like our range DPS, specifically our Hunter, like kind of kill the mines as we're crowd controlling them to keep them away. And then we're pretty much just killing this War Machine. I didn't mark a War Machine in this pack, but I do think it's a good idea to mark one of these with a skull to let your party know, hey, focus this War Machine as quickly as you can. You know, if you can kill one War Machine faster than the other, then it makes that pull a little bit easier. And then we're on to the final boss. The reason we're standing on the corner where I'm standing on this grate, this is kind of a good safe spot because when he does the launch missiles ability, so that's the ability that covers the whole arena with all those circles you see right there, generally standing in that corner is a pretty safe spot. You won't really ever have any circles there, so this is just kind of a good spot that groups I think will be standing in, unless they fix this, but they probably won't, I don't think, but it's possible they do. Until they do though, this is I think a good spot to stand. And then basically your job as a tank is just avoid the Gatling gun, just DPS the boss, make sure you don't get hit by an orange circle. The homing missile is a non-tank ability, so you don't really have to worry about that. Now, when he does go to 50%, he'll go into phase 2. This is pretty easy to manage. The only thing you really have to worry about as a tank is just picking up these sharpshooters, but I think they still just end up buster shotting just random people in the party. So try to help DPSing these down as quickly as you can, while also being aware of if you are targeted by Drill Smash, which I do end up getting targeted a little bit later here. Because if you get Drill Smash, you need to make sure you move to a pillar to get the boss out of this phase as quickly as you can. So as you can see, I get a notification, hey, I've been targeted by Drill Smash. I find an open pillar, which is nicely marked now. It's got that big red, kind of pillar of light that's coming out of the pillar. So just get there as quickly as you can. And I would say save leap during that phase, so that way if you do get targeted with Drill Smash, you can just jump straight to the pillar and have him drop it on top of it. And then make sure once he's channeling the Drill Smash, you move out of it, so that way you don't get hit by it. And then from there, it's just a repeat of phase 1, so it's pretty much home free. And that's pretty much Motherlode. This, honestly, like I said, I think is one of the easier dungeons this season. And the nice thing is I think there's going to be a lot of flexibility with how people route this dungeon. You're going to have a lot of choices with the things you can do. So I kind of look forward to the different things that people will be able to do when they are doing this dungeon. So thanks again, everyone, for watching. I'll be putting out more dungeon guides throughout the next couple of weeks. And go ahead and like and subscribe if you do want to see more videos like these.